Hello, welcome back to Prime Lenses. I'm Ian. Each week I interview a photographer about 3 lenses that have meant something to them on their photographic journey. It's a little bit of gear chat, but then who doesn't love a little bit of gear chat if it comes along with the excuse to talk to some of your favourite people in photography about their life and work. My guest today is Christelle Enquist. She's half of the founder couple behind the Raw Society, a community for photographers dedicated to teaching craft and helping people to grow and be better, as well as providing a community of peers for them to talk to. Her work's been exhibited around the world, and she was recently published in a book celebrating female street photographers. I love this conversation, and if you take a moment away and have a look away from social media at the stuff that the Raw Society publish, I think you'll start to see why their considered approach and patient approach to work is really the way to go. It was great to talk to her. I'm hoping to grab her and Jorge at some point for a conversation in the future. But in the meantime, here's my conversation with Christelle. Yeah, I used to do voiceover work and stuff, and so it was a technique that another voiceover artist taught me, which was that you can have little Lego figures to talk to. Because as bizarre as it sounds, when you're recording, if you're recording something and you're the only person in the room, it does help to have someone to talk to, and you can hear it in the recording. Like, you can hear the difference between when you're kind of emoting, even if you're emoting at a minifig. Yeah. Like, it bizarrely does make a difference. I don't know.
Well, I also find that I make funny faces when I'm talking to myself, and especially if you're seeing yourself as opposed to just talking to someone. So I get it. I get it 100%.
Yeah. No, it totally helps. Where in the world do I find you?
You are finding me currently in Menorca, which is our home.
Amazing. Wonderful.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Menorca, but it's a little island.
I mean, a little, yeah.
Yeah. It's very popular with the English, at least.
Yes. How long have you lived there then? Have you been there a long time?
No, since COVID. So we moved over here. My mom's actually from here, and we moved over here during COVID. You know, in Spain, we had really, really strict lockdown, and we couldn't leave the house for anything but going to the supermarket and all that. So we came here, and we ended up really liking it. So we just stayed, and here we are.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I say because my husband and I work together, and the Raw Society and everything is. So I'm going to start saying me now, because it sounds weird when I say we. It's very weird.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. A friend of mine lives in Spain, or lived in Spain through COVID, and she told me same stories of like very, very severe lockdowns and neighbors telling on each other about walking their dog more than twice a day, and so it got real there for a second.
Yeah, it really did. Excellent.
That's really good. Yeah. So because you mentioned the Raw Society though, and obviously your work, like that's probably a good place to start, really, in terms of talking a little bit about what motivates you both and what prompted you to start such a very, by design, thoughtful, methodical. It's about artistic practice. It's very specifically about street and documentary and travel. Talk me through how that all began for you both, and this became, there's a bit of life's work kind of building here, it seems.
It is. And I think I'm going to hire you for the elevator pitch, because we always have a really hard time trying to explain in just a few sentences what we do, because it is quite varied. And like you say, I think it's really a reflection of what is important to Jorge and myself. And it essentially starts, so it started in 2016. I was volunteering in Nepal, and Jorge was covering the year after the earthquake in Nepal. So we traveled together for a little bit after we had finished our respective work. And we just realized that we had such an amazing time. I think it was just this realization that not only is photography amazing and goes great with travel, but that there are very different ways to travel, right? You can be we always differentiate being a tourist and a traveler. And the traveler in my mind, allows for a little bit of serendipity and kind of goes a bit with the flow. Obviously, you have some points that you're aiming to, stop at or do, but leaving enough leeway to just kind of see where it takes you. And in doing so, we had one of the most amazing trips of our lives. We also fell in love there, so that's just a plus. So
Yeah. Oh, lovely.
but yeah, so that was the the starting point, and we loved Nepal so much, so we just kind of thought, well, we really need to bring other people here because it's such an underrated place. And when people think about Nepal, they think about mountains and not much else. And what we found was that it was so many other things, and so we wanted other people to come and discover it with us. And so, yeah, so that's pretty much how it started. First year, we didn't manage to get anyone to Nepal because we were new and no one knew who we were. And so there was a lot of work, but we also started opening other workshops in different destinations. So we did Morocco and Cuba, and those did work. And now we do 8, 9 different destinations, rotating. There's a lot of places that we go regularly. What Jorge and I do always is we scout the places for about a month beforehand, before we start a new destination, so that we know, we have time to build the connections that we need, and be able to give anyone who comes with us a really amazing experience that is obviously photography, but also the travel part.
But also an incredible way to kind of educate people and bring them along for an artistic practice. Because I think there's that thing that people don't really understand, the scouting part. I've spoken to Dan, Dan Milner. I've spoken to Dan about this sort of thing a few times, and his thing about time and access is where this stuff comes from. And then I always, in my mind anyway, add on top of that the need for iteration cycles in creative work, that you need to kind of go through the whole process and then get to the end. And it's funny, your website for the Royal Society has this thing about, if you're willing to learn a visual language, right? If you're willing to learn it, you can learn this whole other language that's there and is being communicated by artists all around the world. And I was watching a Ralph Gibson interview last night where he was talking about the need to listen to your work. And I think that it's funny that a lot of things seem to align in one place for me, that very visual work was being talked about in a way but it is talking to you and you have to kind of listen to it as well as see it. And it seems like you've very, very specifically gone to produce a business and a culture that does that. Like, is that what you focus on a lot with people, is getting them to understand what they're making?
It is. It's for us. So I think, today everybody has a camera. Everybody, whether it's on their phone or whether it's on, they have a Fuji or a Canon or whatever, all cameras are good cameras if you want to take pictures. And I think that a lot of people see that as something bad. And the way we see it is, it's not bad in and of itself. It's just that, like you said, getting people to realize that it's not just about clicking. It's being a little bit intentional with what you're photographing. So intent is something that we talk about a lot during our workshops, within our community. Is, what are you trying to say? It doesn't have to be something really deep, but just think for a second of, why are you taking this picture? What does it represent? Is it meaningful? And I think that if everybody, did photography, understanding that this is a language, and that within their hands they have this powerful tool that they can use to, whether it's simply to show others an experience that you've had, or to convince someone to go to a place that maybe they would never have thought of going, or change the perceptions of people. I mean, there's so many things that you can do with photography. And I think that the starting point is doing it with intention, right? So yeah.
But have you watched any of the Nat Geo series, photography,
I
yet?
have not. We just came back
So
from
good.
a very long series of workshop, back-to-back
Yeah,
workshops.
right.
And but Jorge was watching it last night, and he was telling me how great it is. So I'm really
It's
looking
really
forward
good.
to sitting down and hopefully this weekend finding some time to
Yeah.
watch it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good. It's really inspiring stuff. And your point there about the telling stories, the first episode focuses entirely upon basically combating um, environmental damage through storytelling using photography and
Yeah.
videography and things like that. And it's so powerful because you don't get to see, most of us don't get to go to these incredible places. Like they're on a boat, I think, in the Bahamas, and they're just they're out seeing this happening and seeing
Hmm.
drilling and seeing what the impact is. Well, to you and I, that could be anywhere. That could be Mars, for
Right.
how close we actually are to the wildlife. And so yeah, so no, I think it's an overlooked thing. I say this a lot at work because I work in video games, and the studio I work for, I keep trying to push us to take photos now. We've just moved into a new building. It's a really big deal. And I want us to take the photos now that we'll use 10 years from now, 20 years
Yeah.
from now, to talk about where we were and what things were like. And in fact, future guest of the pod is going to be a guy called Doug Menwes, who did the Fearless Genius book
Hmm.
of photos of Silicon Valley and stuff. And so I think there's huge power in, like, oh my god, there's David Hockney with a dog being shown Photoshop in the 90s for the first time.
Yeah.
It's like
I mean, as a historical document, I think it's, so important. And we have these conversations, because of course there's people who do more street photography within our community, others who do more documentary, some people who do documentary with very, very serious stories behind them, others they're a little bit more light. And I think there's all of them are important. It's not that, I mean, of course, if you're doing something that is about, ecology and the environment, of course, that is a very pressing issue right now. But there's also equally important to have a document of a time and place in history, right? And you were saying this because we've got some friends right now that are living here in Menorca, and they are planting orange, like huge orange groves. They're starting to produce oil and honey. And I said to, that it's a man who has lots of land, and this is his kind of way of showing his love for the island. And I said, I really like to spend the next few years just documenting this process because I think that it's really important as a documentation, um, especially because the orange, we don't grow oranges to sell here. They used to, but it stopped. So he's kind of reigniting this kind of process, and I think that it's really important. So for posterity.
yep, yep.
These kind of things are really, really important. So I don't know. I think that everybody has a role in photography if they want to. They don't have to feel intimidated or think, oh, well, my stuff is not important because I'm not covering the melting ice caps or things like that. I think that it's all important. It's important to have a visual documentation of our times, of something, of a city in how it looks at a point in time, so there's so much to do. And if all these people who had cameras did their photography with intention, then it would be amazing because we'd all be trying to say something relatively important.
I think it is a skill, isn't it? Of story, it teaches you a skill of storytelling. You're sequencing whether you really consciously are or not. Sometimes when you're
Yeah.
just making images, even if you're just choosing what to upload somewhere, it's like the Instagram
Yeah,
story or Flickr or whatever. You're sequencing to some extent, even if that's chronological. Even if you kind of like
absolutely.
very specifically, because some photographers will set that rule for themselves. Like, everything I show you is going to happen. I'm going to show it you in the sequence it happened. That's a rule you can set for yourself. Like, you can set those constraints and then it will come from it. Is that finding stories like this? And because that sounds like a really exciting kind of long term project that you can have sort of in the background. Do you like to have a lot of those sorts of things on the go, or how do you tend to approach projects like that?
Well, I try to have long-term projects that I can go back to when I'm not busy traveling and teaching and managing the Royal Society. But they need to be things that I can do from home, close by, so and I find it really useful to be able to, have these where I'm in no kind of rush. I'm gonna get to it. I'll do it in moments of free time, and I think it's good practice. I don't necessarily. I've got another project that I started and published the first part in the Raw Society magazine, which is about alcohol addiction. And so the first part is my personal experience. And what I want it to be is something much larger where it includes other people as well. But I did this first part as as a way to show others what I'm doing, in case if they want to be a part of it, just be like, well, it's going to be something like this. And also because it's much easier to put myself forward than, ask a whole bunch of other people, because it's a very personal and,
Yeah.
it's a very personal experience and not everybody wants to share it. So,
No.
so these kind of projects, having them in the background and being able to work on them in my free time are great. And sadly, I haven't had very much time to work on either of them lately, but I will.
Yes.
Winter's a great time.
Yes, I was just thinking. That was my newsletter this week was all about the lack of sun. We had an amazing May, and then June has just started with just like, no, it's just going to rain now and grey skies, and in the Highlands it means it when it rains and when it's cold.
Yeah.
It's been under 10 degrees. I'm not sat in a jacket in my own house purely for like cool aesthetic reasons. But yeah, no, it speaks to success though of the Raw Society. Presumably, if you haven't got time though to do some of those projects, that must be quite an interesting. Are you enjoying kind of like, I say starting running a business? I guess you've been at this for 8 years, but are you enjoying that balance, that challenge of like you've always got something new to look at, or are you kind of sort of pining to get back a little bit?
No, I love it. I love it. It's I think that somehow, like I said at the beginning, the Raw Society is very much a reflection of both Jorge and I and the kind of people we are. And for me, the community aspect of the Raw Society is something that is very much in my wheelhouse and something that I truly enjoy. So, the past few years, as we've been building the community and trying to do things with our members and produce projects and all this kind of thing, that for me, that's really fulfilling. We don't have kids, so they are all my little babies, even though some people are double my age, and that's absolutely fine. But but I genuinely, I relish and celebrate all the successes of the people in our community, and it feels really good. So of course, I love taking photographs myself and doing photography. We've got a big exhibition right now that's coming up in Menorca, which is going to be a retrospective of these past 7 years of work of Jorge and myself. So of course, I'm loving, getting that prepared and can't wait to open for the opening on the 16th of July. But I also really, really enjoy everything else. And I think that because we have, the company is small, it also means that the sky's the limit. If Jorge and I are willing to do it, we can do it. If we are willing to risk whatever it is that comes, and Jorge has lots of crazy ideas, and if we're willing to risk it, we will. And I think that freedom is something that's really important, and which has allowed us to do things like the Raw Society magazine and other projects that we're working on for the near future.
Small teams do great work. It is a personal theory of mine, and you hear sometimes the 2 pizza rule, which admittedly is American pizzas, but 2 pizza rule of like, if your team can't be fed by 2 pizzas, then it's too big. And you need
I hadn't heard that before.
Have you not heard that rule?
No.
It's a Jeff Bezos rule.
Okay.
But yeah, from early days in Amazon, that if a specific team working on something was more than two pizzas, because communication becomes unwieldy and it gets quite complicated, and you can't make decisions quickly. Like the nice thing for the
Absolutely.
pair of you, you
Yeah.
only have the two of you. The two of you are both invested in this. You're not working on separate endeavors. It's not like he's a pianist and you're a photographer or something. You've got sort of
Correct.
different things, and they sometimes come together. You are both focused on the same thing. You only have to worry about the two of you. A friend of mine, he's run his own business now for about 30 years. And someone said to him once, "Who do you build your software for?" And he went, "Well, me and my wife, predominantly, because that's all
Yeah.
it has to support." So, like you, they're a couple, they
Absolutely.
do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very powerful. And I think, photography is probably richer for it.
Well, it's definitely, yeah, we do everything in the way that we would like to have it done. So
Yeah.
that is absolutely the case. And, now we have the support of our studio manager, May, who is
Mhm.
in the US. And we've just brought on our American counterparts who are in Alabama, in Gulf Shores, Alabama,
Cool.
who are very similar to Jorge and myself. So it's just nice also when we're working on projects to be able to exchange with a couple more people, but it still remains
Mm.
small and essentially the final decisions are taken by Jorge and myself. But I think sometimes you need other cheerleaders to cheer you on
Mm.
because it can get really difficult at times.
Yeah.
So when you have people who are um, always positive and they want things to work out as much as you do,
Mm.
then it makes things a lot easier. And so yeah.
I've had this thing I've said on a few episodes now where I'm not going to look at the stats for the podcast. I've just decided not to look at the numbers because it would change the nature of the conversation. However, last night when I was doing a bit of prep and I was doing some thinking, I was feeling a bit low. And just at that point, a listener messaged me and said how much they were enjoying it. I was like, okay, actually, and I messaged them back going, your timing is amazing. Like this is exactly what I needed to hear before I sit down and like write notes and do whatever. So I think that kind of, it can feel quite lonely sometimes. I don't know if it's a hangover from the pandemic or whatever, but we're more connected than we've ever been, and yet somehow feel less connected sometimes, or less certain maybe about putting stuff out in the world.
Well, I think that no matter how passionate you are about something, you always occasionally at least need people to kind of push you along, not push
Yeah,
you, but cheer you along. It
yeah,
gives you a renewed sense of purpose and energy and things like that. So I think that many times it's happened to us where we're struggling because we're trying to get one thing out, or a lot
mm,
of things that we do, it comes out of pocket especially when they're new projects. And just hearing someone say, "Oh my God, I appreciate what you guys do," or this is, we've had people tell us that we've changed their lives for the workshops we've taken them on. And for me, that is, it's golden. It's I don't think there's any
oh yeah,
better kind of
no,
comment, and especially coming from advertising where I definitely was not changing anybody's life. It makes me feel really good.
what kind of what kind of products were you pushing generally?
Well,
Was it
I was in packaging design, so I
okay?
managed clients,
Hmm.
um, very big clients for
Mm.
packaging design. And it's, I mean, I loved it
Mm.
while I did
Yeah,
it, but
yeah,
it's definitely not something that you know fills you with a vital sense of purpose and things like that. So
yeah.
um,
Well,
yeah,
and if it
I
does, they should, someone for whom it does should be doing it, right? Like whoever's
sure.
get, that's the thing, isn't it? I used to work briefly for about 4 or 5 years. I worked in gas sensing, and it was
Hmm.
life saving stuff. We were putting life saving equipment onto like submarines, like it, or keeping people like it's good. But I didn't get out of bed every morning and go, I blooming love sensing CO2. Like it was not, but there are people I know them who are still there
Yeah,
and they love it and it's good work. And I'm like, I'm really glad. But when the opportunity for me to go and do something else came along and it was a passion, I was like, well, I can't say no. I can't say no to this, and you shouldn't. I think you should
yeah.
find where your heart lies. Well, on the subject of things that people love, as a seamless segue into your
Hmm.
first of your three lenses, because I really enjoyed getting your list. I thought it was fun. It's great because this podcast is in danger of becoming a Polaroid and Leica podcast.
Oh
So
no.
anytime someone comes along with actual different lenses from a completely different system, that's great. So,
I will do my
which,
best to
yeah,
explain the ones that
yeah.
I use. So we'll go on, ask me a
Well,
question first, and
which of
then
your three do you want to go through first?
well, I think let's go with the 18. Let's go with the
Okay.
18. Yeah. 18, which would be so we're talking Fuji, so crop sensor.
Hmm.
And that one is, I think maybe because I pretty much started with that lens.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that it's perhaps not the most usual lens to start with because it's quite wide. And and I don't know, I really, really liked it. I enjoyed, I'm not a shy person when I speak. I speak a lot, but I am a little bit more shy when I'm out on the streets. So having that lens and getting really close to people kind of gave me the excuse. I was there on a mission and I had that lens that meant that I had to get really close to people. And so I really enjoy using it. I still use it a lot. Probably, yeah, about 70-80% of my photography is done with that lens still. Um, and yeah, it's a difficult lens when there's a lot going on because you really have to, um, you have to frame really well because there's
Yeah.
just so much in there.
Hmm.
And the other thing is that it has its limitations. So depending on certain countries that we go to, streets are wider, and therefore
Hmm.
I can't get close enough to do the work that I would normally do, and that's when I switch lenses for the most part. But in places like Nepal, where the street, you can be in the middle of the street and get as close as you want to most things, or
Yeah.
Cuba, it's a great lens to use, and I really enjoy using it.
I've found 28 and 35 are really good European lenses in that towns tend to be things are close together. And
Hmm.
I had this kind of epiphany a couple of years ago. I was in the States and I was rocking my favorite 35-8 that for me is like the king of lenses, and it stays on the front of my M the whole time.
Yep.
And it just didn't, I couldn't find my eye. When you're out with a
Yep.
camera, you've got some time to yourself, you're like, I'm going to go and make photos. And then somehow, and just nothing's working and you're
Hmm.
not feeling it. And I was in San Francisco, and I think it was just the size of everything was so far apart. And I felt so far from everything that actually a 50, or even in some cases like a 90, would
Yeah.
have meant I could frame the thing that I was looking at. But on a European street, I'd have been that much closer. I'd have needed 28 or 35 because actually, in some cases, you can't get further away. Like, I don't know if you've in the UK, if you've ever been to places like York, which are really old sort of towns. Things are very, very close together
Hmm.
sometimes, and
Yeah.
sometimes a 28 millimeter lens feels perfect because you just can't step any further away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's versatile in that sense.
It is. It is. And so the next lens that I would probably speak about, and it's one that I've been using a lot less, is the 27, so 40 equivalent,
Hmm.
2.8. And just to have a good difference between, the 18 that I have. So, it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it's just a tiny bit. It's really
Mm.
a larger difference. And that one I really, really like a lot. It's not super common to have a 40, I don't think. People are usually with a
Yeah.
50 or the
Yeah.
35. But I really, really enjoy using that. And it's great for what you were saying, when you're in situations where the streets are a little wider and you can't
Mm.
get close enough. I do enjoy using that one a lot. Like I said, it's been I actually started using it because I was in one of those situations that you were saying where, nothing was working with the one that I
Mm.
always use. And I thought, well, I'm just going to change lens and see what happens because obviously I'm just not, you know, something's off. It might just be
Yeah.
me. on this day, but
Yeah.
let's try and change the lens and work with that for a while. And usually when I do that, I also like to, so if I'm on a trip, I'll try and stick to one for the whole time. I like having a coherence across my images and not, changing lenses too much. And even when I'm using my kit lens, which is very, very good for a kit lens, and I still use it very often, I will normally be photographing at 18, 27, or 55. So even though it's a zoom lens, I set it to one of those.
Yeah.
So it's essentially when I'm just being lazy or I don't want to bring all my lenses, that I'll take the kit lens.
There's a lot to be said for being lazy. I think, again, I'll quote Ralph Gibson for the second time in the podcast, but he talked a lot about like you've got to learn to listen to your camera and listen to what it like, because it will win. It doesn't matter what you thought you saw. It's going to give you the image that it saw, and you have to kind of learn to work within that. And actually, sometimes the constraints are really, really powerful. Like if you just give yourself that thing, if you're only taking one, Torsten Overgaard talked about this as well when I was talking to him, like you just choose one for the day and then take it out. And then that, and even if it's a 90, like, well, you've got 90 for the day. So what are you going to make with that? And I think that's quite a nice way of looking at it. I really love what you were saying as well about consistency across the images, because I think a lot of people, when they think of that, think of like color consistency and white balance and exposure and things like that, or types of subject. But actually, you're right. Like framing, just
it changes a lot. It changes a lot when you're photographing with an 18 or a 28. And so what that's why I was saying that even with my zoom lens, I'm very consciously setting it to one or the other, and it's more because I don't know. We're on a trip. This was quite a while, in 2019. We went to document the opening of a monastery in the Himalayas, and it was really cold, really high up, very far away from civilization. I mean, it was just a very, very treacherous trip to go there, and I decided I was just going to take my kit lens because I didn't want to have to think, on top of the fact that I was out of breath and very tired and unable to have a shower and all of these other things. I didn't want to have to think, oh, I also now have to change lens if I want to do a portrait, or change lens because there's not enough space. So I stuck with it and it worked wonderfully. I was really happy with the work that I did there. But yeah, I think that the lens shouldn't become an obstacle. And so I think there's a part of, you need to know yourself as well. And, I know myself, and I'm capable of, because I'm hard-headed, I'll be like, no, I'm not going to change lens. I have to figure it out with this one. Whereas, so it's just better to have the kit lens in that case and have the flexibility. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, no, it totally does. I think especially for a trip like that. A friend of mine once got invited on a big mountaineering trip like that. She got invited to Everest Base Camp, and her mum's only piece of advice to her before she went was take something with you that makes you feel like a certain way. Because, like you say, you'll be up a mountain, out of breath. You know, like it's all gonna suck. Like, just take some things that are a bit talismanic to you.
Yeah.
And as a photographer, you've kind of got that, I guess, with the camera, because I find if I'm in an unfamiliar place, my camera kind of helps me to center a little bit. It's something I've done for so long. I look to pick it up for kind of comfort, and like, this is something, your plane's late, you're in an airport you've never been to, you're just being told you're going to put on a bus, like, just like, okay, what can I control? I can
exactly,
control
and
ISO,
you have that one thing,
aperture, and shutter.
It just makes you feel so much better. So it's a good combination, and usually I'll choose one for a trip, maybe two, but I never go with more than two lenses on a trip usually. I just, those extra 500 grams make a difference when you're walking for kilometers and kilometers and hours. So I like to keep things simple, not have anything, distracting me, and just being in the moment and present. And just free to observe and do my thing
Yeah.
without having to think about all the other bits and bobs, basically.
Yeah. When you're doing workshops, presumably you're not quite as free to observe because you've got to observe your children running
Yes.
around and make
Yes.
sure no one's falling off a cliff or going where they shouldn't, or whatever. Do you find you still get some time to make some work then, or is it?
It's I mean, we do, but it's obviously it's not our priority. We're not there to
Yeah.
take photographs. We are on the ground with all the participants whenever, so we will be there all day long out on the streets with
Mm,
them, and not like as a group, but we're out there with them in case anyone
mm,
wants to come back and ask us questions, or if they want to consult something throughout the day. They don't have to wait until the very end of the day to, where we meet
yeah.
back at the hotel and things like that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not our priority. It's not something that
Mm,
we're looking to do our best work while we're at a
sure.
workshop here. And especially because, we have small groups, and usually it's a maximum of 6 people
Mm,
with both Jorge and I on the workshop.
yeah.
So it's a pretty good ratio, 1-to-1 ratio. And we have people with very, very different skill levels as well. And
Right.
so what we do is we adapt our workshop in the moment according to each person's level. And so
Yeah.
that does take some time, and you're focused on mentoring each person according to their abilities and their experience and things like that. But I don't think we'd have it any other way. So pretty
No.
happy with how we do it.
The more we talk, I think the more impressed I am with like the fact that you have to switch gears so often. So, because it must take months to prep. What's the kind of average time between prepping, like saying, right, putting a pin in a map and
Hmm.
going, we're going to go here, to getting there, to kind of scoping it out, to maybe finding fixers, to you see, you can tell I'm an old school project manager in my
Yeah.
background, right? Like I'm
Yes, I
just
can
I'm
tell.
I'm I'm seeing a checklist with each one of these things, and then you've got to go back with 6 people who've never been and get
Correct.
them all to the same place, and things will have changed on the ground. What's the
Yes.
kind of it must take a year or month, 6 months or something.
Well, so the good thing is once you've done it once, you
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
it's done.
Hmm.
And of course, there's always logistics to be done between every new workshop. But
Hmm.
you are right. So it's usually about 6 months between finding, the hotels, and I do all of that. So we don't usually, unless it's, in very exceptional cases, we will have a person on the ground that is helping me work things out. Um, that's maybe when I don't feel as comfortable in the place, in terms of like my knowledge of the place. Then I'll refer to someone local. But otherwise it's all done by me, and that means going to hotels, checking them out. I want to make sure that because in my experience hotels can look really nice, and then they can be quite terrible, or vice versa. So just getting a feel of that. And I think what the part that really takes a long time, and this is always happening, is building connections. Because one of the main benefits of coming on a workshop is that you can do in a week what would otherwise take you maybe a month, 2 months, or several visits, right? So we're saying, here we go, we have these connections, and we're going to take you and expose you to these really great experiences. But those experiences don't come like, just, you can be lucky, of course, but usually to ensure that you have these experiences, you need to know people, and they have to be able to, you know so I think that it's all that previous work, and that takes a lot of time. um it's also something that I would say I'm pretty good at, because I was a client manager and logistics is my thing. Jorge is
Yeah.
awful at it, and that's great
Those of us who are
because
formerly agency people, you see, it's a skill set you learn. This is good.
it is. And so, I think in that way we're also lucky, because we have very different skill.
Mm,
Photography unites us, but in terms of what our skill sets are, they're quite different. And I'm all about, being on time and logistics and sorting things out and finding solutions to problems, because I did have to put out lots of fires when I was working in advertising. So, and I enjoy it. So, it works out great.
I also seek variety in my work. Like I need a bit of stuff to change up a little bit, otherwise it
Yeah.
becomes a bit, luckily for you, you've got an entire planet to go at in terms of potential locations. So hopefully you guys won't get bored.
We won't. We won't. I don't
Yes.
think so. That would, I mean, no, it would say nothing good of us if we got bored. There's so
No.
much to discover and so many things to see and to take others on. One of the places we really want to go back to, and we're hoping to do next year, is to Iraqi Kurdistan. We did that last year, and it was a first. We really, really enjoyed it. It was one of the most surprising destinations that we've done. And so we would really like to go back to visit there, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Hopefully, the world doesn't go up in flames between now and then.
Right. It's trying its hardest. It's just, it's crazy right now. But yeah, hopefully things calm down a little bit and sense prevails.
Yes.
Fingers crossed. And then you can spend your winter months when it's a little cooler with a map going, right, okay, putting pins in like
Exactly.
where the next destination is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're putting together stuff like this, so presumably it's like week-long workshops, attracting people to come and sort of, to go all these different places. You've got to work out, I guess, what happens in like there's an off season, I suppose, for these sorts of things as well. Or isn't there? I'm assuming there's a part of the year when you maybe do more of this, and then there's a part of the year when you're doing maybe more organizational.
We've spent 7 years trying to figure this out and have not, to this date, quite managed, because you'd think, well, people have free time in summer and, Easter, those kind of things, but there is very little correlation between that. I think it's much harder to, I think one of the hardest things is that the destination and that people's availability coincide. So, people might be free, but don't want to go to that particular place and want to go to another one. So what's really difficult is getting the right places in the right times. And that is really just, I think, trial and error. And it might work one year and then it doesn't work the next year. So it's all really, it's baffling. It baffles me to this day. I have still no idea. I do not have the secret. And so we just, we play around with the different workshops that we have. And, we launched this year for the first time the Day of the Dead in Oaxaca, Mexico. And we've been pretty reticent to doing one in Oaxaca because it's such a popular place for photo workshops. And so we were like, oh, do we really want to be another, workshop doing Oaxaca Day of the Dead? And so basically I said, well, we'll do it under one condition. If we can find a way to make it a little bit not just focused on the parades, but a little bit more in the tradition and what the meaning behind, what the Day of the Dead represents and all of that. So gaining access to families in smaller towns and being able to document that side of things, because I think that very often in these kind of festivals, not just Oaxaca, but like these very visually pleasing festivals, the representation and the meaning behind it gets a little bit lost. And so what we want is to be able to get into that part as well. And so, luckily we have this wonderful community of 250 members, which also helps when I say, hey, does anyone know of anyone in this place who might be able to help us? And surely, sure enough, someone did. And so we managed to find an option where we could do things a little bit differently. And within 24 hours, the workshop sold out. And that is a first for
Wow.
us. I mean, that's never, they can sell out fast, but not in 24 hours. And you just think, what am I missing here? I don't understand why, some
Yeah.
things work out like that and some don't. But yeah, it's all a matter
I
of
think
trying.
you didn't come here for feedback directly, but like I think people can tell when things are made with care and done thoughtfully. And I think the audience, hopefully that we both speak to, the audience I aspire to speak to and the audience you
Yeah.
are speaking to, I think have sense and a bit of taste and are like, no, this seems different, and they probably trust your work because you've also done the work in terms of printing and producing the magazine and putting your work out in front of you. You've done the thing that Dan says real photographers do and that everyone else is scared of doing, right? Of
Yeah.
actually getting something printed, putting it out into the world, using it as a calling card for your own projects as well.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that you're backing it up. You're not just, saying come here and we'll take some pictures.
Well, yeah, we definitely try, and those who know us and have been on workshops, I mean, they definitely know that, and they also know that they can count on us well after the workshops to discuss their project. It's not, oh, we do a workshop and we're done, and we don't speak again
Yeah.
until the next time you come or not, right?
Mm.
We're consistently in communication with the people that come to our workshops, and for us it's important because we're when we it sounds really cheesy, but we want to be a part of their photographic journey.
Yeah.
Cheesy, call it whatever you want, but
No,
it's the truth.
great.
It's like I said, I enjoy seeing the evolution of the photographers around me. I feel that their successes I share their successes with
Yeah.
them, and so for us it's really important to be a part of that and be able to guide them whenever we can. And yeah, so it's we do things with a lot of care, and but sometimes you try things and they just don't work out, or it becomes
Mm.
much more difficult. And again, that's the beauty and problem of having a very small company, is just saying, let's try it, but it also might not work out. And we've this year we've tried out two new things. One was a writing and photography workshop, and that
Mm.
was amazing. So we brought a writer in, and Kayla Green, she's the editor in chief of our magazine as well. So she taught writing to the photographers as well as them doing the photography course, so that they could produce something that was both written and photographic. And the experience was amazing. The work that the participants produced was brilliant, and it was just a whole different way of doing photography, because they had to kind of put two different thinking caps on. I remember when we explained to our participants how the days were going to go, they kind of looked at us as if we were absolutely mad. And luckily they trust us. And so, they did the work, and it all came out really wonderfully. And then the one we did with Daniel a couple of weeks ago, which was also amazing. And, I've been trying to get Daniel to do a workshop with us for a very long time. Not that he didn't want to, it's just that, he's always very busy.
He's always somewhere, that man.
Yeah, he is. And so I was so excited to have him teach bookmaking, do editing, and just spend a whole entire week, doing that. But for most people, it's a weird concept because you're not doing any photography. You're bringing your photography
Yeah.
and sitting not inside all day long. We had a beautiful house and great views and everything,
Yeah.
but you're not actually producing anything, photographically
Mm.
speaking. And so it's a hard sell sometimes to say, no, you're
Yeah.
not going to be doing any photography, but you're going to be able to create something really amazing at the end of this, and
Yeah.
have something to show for it, a book or a amazing magazine and all that kind of stuff.
I think it's a skill set that's hard to find as well. Like
Yeah.
out in the world of people who can teach you to do that. I think sometimes with something like that, I think you probably do have to go to the place. I think about this a lot with you would have, in days gone by, you would get your film developed, someone else would tell you which ones you got. Someone else would
Absolutely.
tell you whether you
Yeah.
made, so putting all of that on a modern photographer, where you have to be photographer, you have to come up with the concept, you then have to be your own editor, colorist, grader, touch up artist. We have this thing in front of us, this computer that will let us do anything. And the downside is when we feel like we have to do everything, just because it can do all those things doesn't mean that you should necessarily have to or feel the weight of doing all those things. It goes back to what you were saying about relative skill sets.
Right.
You can do things, Jorge can do other things. You need to lean on the skill sets around you. And so, yeah, it feels like it's worthwhile. Mel, who was, I guess, my friend who's a photographer, who's a guest on a previous episode by the time this goes out, if that makes sense. We're time traveling.
Yeah. Excellent.
She's done books and been on retreats for exactly that purpose, just to teach herself about sequencing and editing and work with an editor and go back and forth. Because it's also, you develop that connection so much more quickly, don't you, when you're in person?
Absolutely. And you're building relationships, so Dan's always talking about creating your environment or your ecosystem, right? And I think that actually when you go on workshops or do these kind of things, those people often become part of your ecosystem as well. So meeting them in person is not the same as, chatting for a moment on Instagram or whatever. And but it is really difficult because, I think still today you can count on designers and editors and all of these things. But I think that we're also expected to know more of all of those things. And the person who does know more of a little bit of design, a little bit of, being good at editing, being good at sequencing, being good at writing, knowing how to market themselves, they're the ones that will come up on top, right? And so we're trying to, it kind of sucks because, not everybody's good at marketing themselves or designing and things like that. But I think that that's how you differentiate yourself from others. And today, we've got several photographers that are great writers and have managed to get, published and do amazing things because they could, they were a more complete package, if you want to call it that.
Well, you're an easier sell to an editor at that point, aren't you?
Yeah.
If you're coming with something, I may have told this story before on the podcast, but my dad was in his retirement would just drive around in his sort of late 70s to when he passed away when he was 90, right? Would drive around and would just bump into people because he had all the time in the world. So he'd have his camera in his bag and he would just drive around. And then before he knew it, he would be talking. He'd be talking to the guy who breeds a certain type of sheep. What he would do, which was really interesting because he had so much time on his hands and he was a lifelong photographer, was he would carry, he'd always have, and I got this from him, right? Like there's always a camera within arm's reach, just in case, right? Like, because you never know, there might be a squirrel at the window or something, or who knows. But he would always have it in the car, and so he would go to the pub or somewhere in this village. You would drive for a morning, and he would find people and just get their life story out of them, and then before they knew it, that afternoon they would have a camera in front of them, and they'd be telling their life story, and he would sell that story to like a local magazine in the UK for kind of beer money, effectively. And it's like, without meaning to, he was doing the sort of thing, he'd just learned to do it a little bit and was semi-successful, but because he arrived as the full package, as you were saying, he could write a bit, he could take a decent enough picture. Those things combined were like, well, okay, you found an interesting story we'd never have found. You've written something down about it. We can edit that if we want to. You got some images. We can be selective of how many we use. And then you've actually you've solved a problem for someone. Yeah. And I think that's, if you want this to be your job, that is a part of it. Like, it does suck a little bit, but you do have to solve an editor's problem, not bring them problems. Exactly. You could come to them with the best idea in the world, but if it can't really be very easily executed, or its chances of success are razor thin because you need that person over there to be free and that to be free, and it's got to be the equinox, and these newts only mate once every 17 years. Right. Like that, like, might be an amazing story, but the chances of it coming off are So slim.
Slim to none. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's difficult, I think. And it's difficult, but I would say that photography is also evolving in a way where there's so many different options. And, I think a lot of the teaching we do is to make people realize that, being in a magazine is not your only option anymore. You can start your
Yeah.
own newsletter and produce some amazing work there. You can create a book. You can do a podcast. There are so many different ways to communicate and get your ideas out there and create this ecosystem that Dan talks about so often, as well as obviously doing exhibitions and making up your own kind of things. Jorge and I, we very often when we say, okay, well, no one will buy or do what we want, we'll say, well, we'll produce it then, and that's the beauty. You can now self-publish books. There's so many different options that back in the day people didn't have. So yes, it's more difficult to maybe publish in National Geographic or, the New York Times or whatever, but we also have a lot of other options where we can put our work out there. And if we're a little bit good at marketing, I think that people have a real chance of creating their community, their own communities, their own ecosystems, and being able to be relatively successful in what they do. At least that's our experience. And even though we do something that's a little bit different, but we do live off of our photography and the knowledge that we have accumulated over the years doing photography, and hopefully being able to translate all of our knowledge to the people who are willing to listen.
No, and I'm thrilled that people like you exist doing this sort of thing, because it's clearly considered. You're not just, I didn't go to the Royal Society website and you were like, look at my presets, jump on this thing, here's my YouTube channel of 5 things. Like, you're not doing the clickbaity things. You're building something over time, it seems.
Yeah.
You've maybe got a kind of more thought through, because it
requires lots of patience.
Yes, well, but I think so. In my notes, I've got my notes open to the side here, and the thing I made notes on was around slow pace, thinking in terms of narrative, both in terms of what you're trying to do with the Royal Society, but also in terms of teaching people to tell a story. Because I think your chances growing, something I was thinking about when you were talking about success a moment ago was that growing up in the 80s and 90s, you would be led to believe that the only success was total global success,
sure,
on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert success. But actually, which would be a cool place to end up.
Absolutely.
But I think that we've got to kind of manage our expectations. Your likelihood of being a Kardashian is no greater than your likelihood if you were a peasant of being Henry VIII, right? That's the reality of. There's a lot of luck and right place and right time. And that sits there. So I think if you can, on your own terms, make something, or to speak personally, if you can have a dream that Jason Momoa is showing you his lens collection and then wake up on Christmas Day last year and go, I'm going to make a podcast. That means
yeah. But I mean,
on your own terms.
Exactly. I think that's the key, is on your own terms. And again, success has so many different meanings, and I think that it's more and more, it's okay to have your own meaning of what success is. For me, success is, being able to do what I love, being surrounded by people who are passionate as we are, and doing something that's fulfilling. Of course it's hard. I'm not, what we do sounds like, oh, it's so much fun, we're always traveling and this and that. But I promise you, I have missed my house for the past month and a half because I have not been able to, just sit. I've had half-packed suitcases, lying around for the past 4 months. And so, it gets stressful. And sometimes, you're struggling to make ends meet at times because it's not consistent all the time. So all of these things any photographer, whether it's, the business structure that we have, or you're an freelance photographer, we all have these struggles. But as a whole, I love waking up and saying, oh my God, this is what I get to do every day. And there's days that it's harder, but it's still, what a great thing to do.
You've been very generous with your time, so I won't take up more of your time. But one thing that strikes me whilst we're talking is
Yes.
I'd be curious if you're carving anything out for yourself. You mentioned that personal project with the orange growing and stuff.
Yep.
Where do you is there something you want to do for yourself in the next little while? It's like a little, it's a short self-contained thing. Do you have a thing you're going to do for yourself, or is it that kind of long term? I mean, it might just be unpack. But I did mean photographically. As someone who travels a lot as well, though, I can fully appreciate.
Unpack would be. I've managed. I'm up to date with my unpacking, so that is great. In terms of photography projects, I usually don't think small. So
okay.
I do have photography projects, but they are, so like I said, the co-addict one that I've started, I want to continue doing. It's a long-term one, and the Orange Grove one. Smaller projects. Not so many small projects.
No, it's all going to be David Copperfield style, make the Eiffel Tower disappear.
Yes. If we're going to do it, let's do it big. And, I think we're generally in that kind of long-term, large things. There's so many projects that we want to get started. And I'm going to tell you a secret, but we do want to start a festival. So that's, something small and for the future.
Sure. Just a little thing. Wow. So that'd be somewhere in the world or near to you, or
probably near to us. And but again, all of these things are slow paced. You need to find the right people who would want to collaborate, and so it's all, I don't want to rush things. We don't believe in doing it quickly and not well. So if we're going to do it, it really needs to be something amazing. So it might take a year, it might take 2 years, it might not happen because we don't find the right people. But we've always got these things in the background that are working, and puzzles that are falling into place and things like that. So, but that would, that's definitely one of the things that I would love to host, is doing something, which is probably not a great time right now because apparently all the photo festivals are, struggling. But which is another challenge, is how do you do something that is actually going to work and succeed when everything else is not quite, they're going down. How do you make something that is adapted? Because I think that it's probably just a matter of them not being adapted to the needs of today, because you set something up, it's so much work, and just keeping up with changes is difficult, right? So I think we have everything to gain in starting something now in this context, but the what, I'm not sure yet. So
well, the industry I work in my day job, video games, is having the same problem with real life events that have existed for a long time, like E3, which used to be the big industry get together in America every year. That's died a death because it was dying before COVID, and then once that happened, that was just, nobody was going anywhere, and they couldn't really bring it back, and everyone had learned to get by without it. My personal feeling is, if you build something that's it's all about scale, really. It's like, what scale are you building it for? Because I think a massive arts festival, it struggles under its own weight, just like any creative. And like movies cost so much money to make, and then they have to make that back before they do anything else. They've got to make back 250 million before even you're out the gates, right, to make it worthwhile. And so I look at things like that and I'm like, well, they're just collapsing under their own weight. So if you can make something that's for an appropriate number of people, there's probably plenty of room. It's like small printing and things like that. There's probably plenty of room for it to exist, as long as you don't overdo it.
But and everything is becoming much more, small scale, much more niche in everything you do. So I think that's what I was saying, that it's trying to take into account today's context rather than what it used to be,
Yes.
which it used to be great. And I love, thinking about what things used to be like, but
Sure.
things are evolving and you need to
Yeah.
adapt and do things that people really want. And that means also listening to, being aware of the changes and what people want and things like that. So a lot of listening is needed.
Yes. Oh, for sure. Well, that sounds really, really exciting. Where can people sign up and find out more about what you're doing so that they don't miss out?
So we have a newsletter, which is at the bottom of every single page on our website. Apparently that's the good practice. And we try not to be spammy at all. So we just send a bi-monthly newsletter. And then, we've got our community. So people can become members of the Royal Society. It's €10 per month. And there's this amazing platform and where we have lots of past workshop recordings. They have they can connect with all the other members, 250 of them. We do regular social meetings via Zoom and Q&As and workshops and a number of different things that all happen on the hub that we have. So it's depending on how involved or not they want to be. Newsletter is good if you just want to, read what's going on, and otherwise becoming a member of the Royal Society is always fun and I think relatively inexpensive.
Excellent. Well, it sounds really good. Well, thank you so much for talking and taking me through some lenses. And they're not Leica lenses. This
was great. No, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. They're Fuji.
Makes such a difference. Although I have to say, I'm depending on the day of the week, I'm a relative outcast because my favorite's a Zeiss. So it's
nice.
The 35 2.8.
They're good too,
Glorious.
though. They're very, very, very good. Yeah.
As Ali, Ali O'Keefe, who does the 1 month 2 cameras channel on YouTube, like she's fond of saying it's very Zeissy.
Very Zeissy.
Very Zeissy. When I get round to doing the t-shirts, that's going to be the t-shirt. I've already shown her the little sketch I've done of like.
You're going to do
Zeissy.
merchandising?
Oh yeah. I've done some stuff. I've been experimenting. It may be live by the time this goes out, but I've got a little storefront set up on Redbubble. So some little pin badges and mugs and t-shirts.
I love merchandising, and we're going to start hopefully soon. I keep saying that we are, but other things time. But I'm all about the merchandising, so I will check it out when and probably buy some things from your new shop.
Thank you. That's excellent. Well, thank you so much. Have a wonderful
rest of the day. Thank you for having me.
Not at all.
Likewise.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah.
And stay in touch.
All right. I will. All right. Take care. See you soon.
Bye. Ciao.
Bye. You can rate and review this series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and that'll help people to find the show. You can also sign up for a midweek newsletter that I've started doing. You can get that at ianfarrell.com/sign-up, and there is a link to it in the show notes as well. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.